I'm going to leave this wet at the bottom here because I'm going to connect I'm going to need to connect the shadow in while that's still wet. So.
Now let's get to our guest, Dan Marshall. You're in there. What are you, sharpening your pencil?
I was spritzing my palette, actually.
Oh, spritzing your palette.
Yeah. I left my heater on, so it was quite warm in here. So everything was needed a little spritz.
All right. Well, I'm going to let you take it away.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to just switch my camera around here. You don't need to see me while I do this. And here we go.
Oh, well, look at that. Shameless self-promotion, man.
I know. Yeah. Hey, I'll take what I can get, right? So the
wait. Hold those arms out. Just hold those arms out and hold them still. Look at that. So Dan is a world-renowned tattoo artist. Did you do those yourself, or do other people do them for you?
No, it takes a lot of concentration, so it's much better to have someone else do your work for you, even if you're capable. It's always going to be better to let a professional do it, and you can just sit there and deal with what's happening.
the pain, yes,
the pain. It does hurt, folks, just a little bit. Yeah.
All right, go for it. Dan.
Oh, okay. So one of the main things, I love going out to paint. We love getting outside and we love painting, and what I find the reality is, and this is just my humble opinion, although professional. So, anyway, but having a sort of idea of what your process is and what your techniques you want to use, brushes you like, color mixtures you like, all of those things can really be reinforced when you're in the studio. And it's really the idea of having a better idea of what you're doing when you get out there to paint. So you're not completely overwhelmed. And the more I know how I'm going to work through this painting, it's the same. I paint here a lot, plein air. So it's a reinforcing of the technique that I use in the studio. It actually becomes the exact same technique I go when I'm outside painting. So having that knowledge and that real understanding of knowing how to get through a painting is only going to help you when you're out in the field. And I know we all have different timelines and limited time, and getting out to paint plein air is the most important thing, I think, for growth and seeing tones and colors and all those interesting colors in the shadows and things. But it's sort of that balance, right? So it's like a little bit of studio, a little bit of plein air. So I'm going to go through a demo of this, and the way that I'm going to approach this is exactly how I would do it in the field. And this is it's a little bit more of a it's not a very complicated scene, especially when we get some snow in there and it's backlit. It becomes sort of a detailed silhouette. So I'm also learning to kind of choose my battles. And when I go out to paint in the field, I'll know what to look for a little bit better. I'll have a better understanding of what I know I can pull off. I don't want to be defeated when I go out. I don't want to necessarily do a great painting every time I go out, but I also don't want to feel like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get through this?
Okay, Dan, before you roll. Okay, sure. People always want to know about your paper, your brushes, and your paints.
Okay, so the paper that I use is almost exclusively Saunders Waterford 140-pound rough paper. And I get these in the big sheets. They're 22 by 30 sheets, and I'll cut them down to whatever size I want. This particular size I'm doing is a quarter sheet, which is 11 by 15-ish. It's about 11 by 15. And for the pigment that I use, it's all tubed watercolor. I don't use any of the cakes. Even in my sketch kit, I squirt tubes into the little empty containers.
I have a question for you there. I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but I did.
No, hey, you're the boss.
What's the difference? Because that stuff, even the tube stuff, is going to end up drying in there. You're not using it fresh all the time. Is that right?
Right. So, I do keep a fairly fresh palette, just because I paint often enough that I'm always filling things up. But the cakes of watercolor are really compressed down. So I can reactivate them with a little bit of liquid, but I'm not going to be able to get much of a heavier consistency.
So you get more tinting strength with tubed paints?
Yes. Yeah. Because it will reactivate. They don't get quite as hard as the little watercolor blocks. So even if this has been sitting in here for a couple days, a little bit of water and a little bit of brushwork on it, and I can get back to some heavier consistency of pigment. Because
and what if you're somebody like me who doesn't do it often? If I let that sit for a month or two, do I need to put new tube paint out?
Not necessarily. So one thing I do, I always have a sponge in my palette, and it's not, you know, it's just a damp sponge. But I keep this in here when I close my palette up. And if you're going to be away from it a while, you know, you can put it in like a Ziploc bag, and that might help keep a little bit of that moisture in there. You know, if you know you're not going to be using them that often. Yeah, so it is. I mean, there's nothing like having freshly poured out paint. But even when if I know I'm going to teach the next day, or if I'm doing a workshop, I'll fill my palette up the night before, so it sets a little bit, so it's just not all running. And you know, you open your palette and everything's washed, you know, kind of run into each other. So you know, I usually set it out the night before, and then it's the perfect kind of consistency the next day.
All right.
And the brushes. Oh, and I, you know, the brands don't really matter. You know, like if you're using an artist grade, a professional grade watercolor, I do use a mix of Daniel Smith, Holbein, and Winsor Newton, and I have different colors that I use from different brands because I have just experimented and I like them. Some of the colors vary a little bit from brand to brand. Some of the textures and the way they work. So I've really kind of gotten to a point where I like, in a really short, condensed version of that, like my traditional cadmium type things are mostly Winsor Newton. My more opaque kind of like accent colors are usually Holbein, like lavender and lilac. I really like Daniel Smith's warm pigments, so most of these are Daniel Smith over here. I like their burnt sienna. It's a little pinker than the yellow than a Winsor Newton. So there's, you know, been some experimentation there to kind of really just get to the things I like. And I'll be using just 3 brushes for this painting. A nice big squirrel mop brush, and this particular one was given to me in China from a company called Martini. But it's just a squirrel mop, so it's got a nice point. So when I'm doing washes, one, it's going to flow very softly off of the brush, but I also have this nice point if I need to cut around shapes. Now I'll be using this is just a little mop brush that I'll be using for some of this dry brushing grassy stuff. And I'm also going to use this fan brush, which is, you know, this is another thing that's fun in the studio. If I was out in plein air, I might not want to experiment with some wacky brush just to see what it does. But in the studio, I'll take those chances. So this is just some natural bristle, cheap fan brush, but I'll be using this to kind of create some of these, again, some of these dry brushy grass growing through the snow. And also in Escoda Perla number 7, this is a synthetic brush, and this holds a lot of pigment. This doesn't. So when it comes to putting in some heavier tones in the shadows and things, and doing the fence posts and smaller detail, I'll switch to this synthetic brush.
Just for the sake of discussion here, Dan, that's 4 brushes, sure. Not 3.
Oh, all right, 3. Okay. If this didn't have this grassy stuff, I probably wouldn't use the fan brush. So yeah. This is really like a special effect brush. But generally, as I work through a painting, I'm going to start with a mop brush and kind of get nice big washes, and then I'll basically work through pigment consistencies to where I'm using thicker pigment, and I'll end up using a synthetic because it holds less water.
All right. So how does this relate to getting ready for plein air painting? Help me understand what your thought process is. So
my thought process is really, you know, there's plenty of ways to skin a cat or a fish or whatever. And knowing what works for you the best, what's going to, how you learn to work through a painting, right? So you develop a painting process. And my process that I've really identified by doing studio work and figuring out what happens when I am outside painting, and because of the medium I'm using, you know, watercolor is a little bit different. So, you know, we're not painting dark to light, you know, we're painting light to dark. So I'm going to think about my lightest tones first, which is going to be my background, and I'm going to sort of work my way forward. And I'm basically going to paint everything except for the middle ground shape. And I'm going to put washes right through that, though. I'm not going to negate that. So I'm going to basically do an underpainting and then put the sort of darker stuff on top. And understanding that's how I like to do it, that's the process I do. I know I'm going to set the whole tone for my painting through this background tone. all the successive tones are going to be based on how light or dark that sky is. So, you know, I've identified my process. I've, you know, taken things I've learned from people, I've adjusted that, I've experimented, and I've done all these kinds of things, and I know what's going to work. So that, just that idea of, do I know how I'm going to get through this painting, and the forethought and that sort of thinking through, you know, watercolor is very much a chess-like medium where you need to know all your moves before you kind of get in there. There's plenty of room to experiment and play, but it's all within a nice sort of construct. And
well, let's get into it. Let's do this.
Let's do it. So, you
by
know,
the way, you got people watching from all over the world. I see Netherlands, I see Portugal, a lot of Canadians.
Oh, hello, Canada.
And then there's Cleveland.
Oh, hey. I used to live in Akron for a while in my teenage years. Okay, so as I'm mixing this color for the sky, I'm going to be a little careful because, like I said, I know that this is going to sort of set the tone for my whole painting. So I don't want it too dark, I don't want it too light, and I don't want it too blue. It's got a little bit of gray in it, so I'm being careful. I'm not rushing to try and find that color. And I am working on a 45-degree angle. So I'm always working sort of top to bottom. I'm letting gravity kind of help me pull this wash down. And I'm going to take this right down to kind of through that mountain. I know there's going to be a darker tone on there, so I'm going to go through that.
You know, you have to use a different angle in different cities because gravity is different in every place.
That's true. The you know, it's funny because one of the main things is the humidity level is really going to affect how this is drying on your paper. So, you know, again, by having that time, getting to know your paper in the studio, getting to know exactly how that process is going to work is it's all reinforcing kind of what you probably know already, or you think you know. But it becomes this, again, it's all about that kind of reinforcement of like what is actually happening here. And I don't want your eye to go too far into this background. So I'm basically just adding water to this mix down. And this is going to be sort of the base for my snow. If I want snow highlights of actual white highlights, I can't leave white paper everywhere. So I know this is going to come through, and I'll get into just a little bit of dry brushing here to leave some little spots of some brighter snow. I'll bring this down. But really, I'm establishing the background and foreground now with these sort of tones. And I haven't really changed color yet, so I'm just using this as a base. Now, before this dries, I'm going to come in with this guy, and I'm going to grab a little bit of burnt sienna and a little bit of yellow ochre, and maybe just a tiny bit of cobalt turquoise. And I'm just going to kind of tint some of this dirtier kind of snow area back there. And again, this is the underpainting, so this is not the finish. It's just sort of establishing some stuff, and that's, I think, one of the bigger struggles of watercolorists or painting in watercolor is, you know, a lot of people want to kind of work through their painting and have it be completely perfect as they go, but the reality is we need to sort of build layers. So essentially, this will be 3 layers: a background, the foreground wash, and then the middle ground wash. Okay, now I am going to get a much sort of darker here in this foreground, so I'm going to come in with some, basically just some cobalt blue and a little burnt sienna. And this can just be wet. I can come in here and spritz. And, you know, there's a lot of my experimentation in what I'm doing. Color experimentation happens a little bit more when I'm in the field, because I'm actually seeing those colors and I'm understanding them. And the brushwork and effect work, that kind of gets a little bit more experimented with in the studio. So I know if I make this fast movement, what's going to happen. If I want to come in and then dump water in here, I'm going to switch brushes, grab a little bit of water. and kind of just dance around while this is still wet and let this kind of do its own thing and make these sort of icy, snowy effects. And again, I don't want to get too dark here. So I'm judging everything. So the background tone is going to inform my foreground tone. And if I do this all too dark, then this midsection, which is backlit, is going to have to get really dark. So I've learned to kind of look for that and know this was going to be fine once I get that dark in there. So it's really a matter of envisioning what you're doing, thinking about that process, thinking about how am I going to get through this. Now this is actually like a weird grayish, it's just a cool, but it's just a weird kind of grayish green, but cool. And I'm going to build this up a little bit just to give me a little bit of that lead in for the how that atmospheric perspective is going to go. Okay, so what I'm really demonstrating here is my process, right? So I've learned how to work through a painting. I do paint a lot, but I always am reassessing things. I'm always learning how I can get through a painting quicker and still tell the story. And one of the big things about, plein air painting is, I don't necessarily want to be photographic. I want to have some poetry there. I want to have some nuances and things. And by spending that time in the studio, I can learn to figure things out. So the way that I'm like putting stuff in here, letting it dry a little bit, then adding some more, it's all, from learning that timing. And that's all, everything from the consistency of pigment to how dry or wet the paper is. Okay, so I might even splatter on that just a little bit. And I haven't really dealt with any of that grass yet. I'm also working my largest shapes to my smallest shapes. So this shape here is the first largest, then the second largest. Well, actually it's a high horizon line, so switch that. But these are my two largest shapes. So I'm working largest shapes down to smallest shapes, and all that grass and things, those are like small shapes. So I can worry about that later. That's for the next pass. Okay. So I've been kind of stalling and chit-chatting a little bit to make sure this is dry. The other thing,
well, I'll tell you this, Dan. We have people watching from Germany. The person in Germany says you're their favorite watercolor painter. Hey.
Oh, geez, thank you. Thank you very much.
India, UK, Australia, and Poland. Poland, thank you for all the assist you're giving. We all give you a thumbs up, Poland. All right.
All right. Yeah, it's hard times. We get through the pandemic, and then there's some other aggression and things. When can we? I guess there is no normal anymore. It's just life. Life is happening in odd ways.
We'll get through it all together. We're here. We're a big family.
Yeah. Well, I hope this is a nice distraction from the media onslaught, and we pray for everybody that's going through all the hard stuff, and if nothing else, hopefully this will be a nice distraction from all of that business.
Distraction is why we're here.
Right. Okay, so I've let all this dry, and now I'm going to move on to my next thing, and it's not this middle ground. I really want to paint. There's a figure in here. I want to paint him. I want to paint this corral, but it's not time for that yet. So it's, I've got to stick to my plan, stick to my guns, and stick to what I know is going to help me get through this painting and hopefully have it be nice. Okay, so now I'm using a little French ultramarine and a little burnt sienna. I'm going to throw just a little bit of purple. Oh, that's too much. If you mix wrong, just take it right out. Nobody's perfect. Okay, so there we go. We've got sort of a grayed out blue. I don't want to do this too purple. It'll bring it too close. I don't want to do it too blue. It'll push it too far away. So I'm sort of looking for that sort of middle tone. And I've got a tone through here already. So I can keep this fairly thin and really sort of think about some of that atmospheric perspective. And I'll do a test there. And that's actually a little too purple. I'm going to add a little more blue in there, just a little bit of cobalt blue. And let's see what that does. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to dry brush to leave a little bit of that sort of tree liney stuff there. But I really don't want this to be come forward too much. I'll bring it down. And now when I start to leave some dry brush skips, I've got this tone under there, so that's going to actually, it'll suggest snow that's far back there in the shadow. But really, I'm always trying to simplify. I'm trying to just sort of give the message of what's back there and not worry so much about being completely accurate or perfect. I don't need to totally follow the shape of this. I've shifted this whole kind of mountain over this way and shortened this gap, and it's all some sort of design stuff. But okay, I'm just going to put a little water here to soften that edge just a little bit, and I'm working my way through. And this gets really confusing down here, and I don't want to confuse the message of the painting. All this has to be is a sort of mountain that's back there in the background. So I'll leave a highlight on this little hill here, and some little directionals kind of happening back there.
Jeff Eichhoff says he loves how Dan has changed the design to make it stronger. Would you talk about that briefly?
Yeah. So one of my biggest I don't know, pet peeves is composition without any thought, right? So you have a photo, maybe it's a beautiful photo, and you say, I want to paint this photo, and you don't think about the design of the painting. You think you're looking at the photo and you're thinking about the photo without really thinking, well, is this composed well? Is this composed well? And there are some interesting sort of directionals happening here. We've got this really nice kind of zigzaggy thing happening. But what I've done, I always work on a rule of thirds as my starting point. And essentially, and oftentimes I will put in sort of tick marks on the outside of my paper to, when I'm doing the design process. I tried to save time by, I have sketch down in here, but I'm always thinking about where are things placed in this third. I don't want 3 equal strips. I either want a high horizon line or a lower horizon line. I never want it in the middle. And where this third cuts through here, this is going to become my focal point, my center of interest. So I've redesigned everything to help kind of point you over in this area here. So when I come in with some of these grass, that's going to sort of lead up to here. This will kind of come down, and then this sort of leads you back in. This leads you in here. So there's a lot of V's happening. There's a lot of funneling. There's a lot of directional that happens in the composition. So it's, I've cropped this over to here. I have moved this over this way a little bit. So it's all to make a stronger painting.
You oftentimes do a sketch, just a small sketch in a sketchbook to make sure you get it where you want it to be.
It almost hurts me to say this, but a lot of times I don't. Where I am, because
there's not a right or wrong, Dan. The plein air police are not going to get you.
I don't know. They might. So one of the things I find is I'll lose inspiration. So I don't like doing tonal studies. I don't like doing full, like if I'm out working in my sketchbook, I will. But I do often do no-tan sketches, which I've talked about with you before. And I've done, I'll do thumbnails and things like that. But, for one of the main things I really like to do is try to work through that painting as mentally as possible. So then when it's time to paint, I can just get in there and paint. So that also speaks to the preparedness is, if you haven't read Edgar Payne's Composition Composition for Outdoor Painting, that's the best Bible manual to learn stronger composition skills. But I will on occasion do just no-tan sketches. They're just black and white design sketches. But I mean, this is a small part. I have thousands of these. So
we outline the process that he goes through in his videos. He's got one called Effortless Watercolors, one on cityscapes, another on plein air. So right, Dan, there we go.
This is the actual no-tan that I did for the video of that. So I do keep these, and I go back and refer to them. But it's as much as you gain brush mileage, you can gain design mileage, and you can start to know the space you're working in. So at bare minimum, I will put these tick marks just so I know where my sort of rule of thirds is here. It's the same thing when you go to crop a photo. That grid comes up to help you compose a better photo. And, you know, I'll pick one of these intersections to be my focal point, and that's going to sort of dictate everything. So this is an interesting area to me. So I'm going to recompose to where, you know, it's basically more like this. So I know this is going to, you know, your eye is going to land somewhere around where these two lines intersect. And then everything else just supports that. It's all to support the idea of what is this painting about. And it's, you know, there's no cows out here. They're not grazing out here in the winter. So maybe this guy's out here, you know, I'm trying to develop a little bit of a narrative with a figure to just say, well, maybe he's out here doing some stuff, you know. So I mean, it's that simple. You know, it's giving yourself some sort of reason for the painting, some sort of something beyond, oh, that's a nice photo, you know, and developing a story, you know, and if it's not interesting, if there's nothing interesting about it, you know, it's not going to be an interesting painting. It's just going to be a collection of tones and shapes. So one of the things I really like to sort of think about and push is the idea of, you know, am I telling a story here? What's my narrative? Just putting in some little bushes there. And this is being really careful. I just want these soft back here, just some little soft things. Because again, I don't want it. This isn't the painting. This is the painting, or you know, I'm thinking about the whole painting. So I'm trying not to overdo anything anywhere. Okay, and with this stuff here, I can just kind of suggest in. Again, I've got that tone underneath, so if I just kind of dry brush on top of that, that's going to give me the effect of some of this stuff happening back here. Come through here like this, and I'm working my way forward. So each section, you know, the sky, I'm working my way forward. The foreground, I'm starting and working my way forward. The mountains are at the top, and it's this sort of middle ground is working its way forward. And I guess I can come in down here and do some of this stuff. And again, this could change. I could put this middle section in before I start to come in and put in some of this sort of idea that there's grass growing through here. But you know, that's where the sort of, you know, when it gets down to this point, I do have the freedom to kind of think, well, do I want to put this stuff in here yet, or do I want to wait? So at this point, to me, knowing how I want to do things, what I'm going to do, it doesn't matter. So I can have fun and kind of come in and do some of this stuff now. And this is getting drier. So I'm going to come in here with this fun fan brush now. And, you know, I'm thinking about this. There's a slight hill here. So I might want to just put in the idea that this is some directionals that are kind of coming in there. Leave some grass through here.
All right, as a question from the audience, it's to ask what device you're using to view your reference image.
Oh, this is an iPad Pro.
All right.
It's just it's the larger iPad Pro. But it's a nice size to work. Honestly, though, when I'm working in the studio and working from photos, a lot of times I am just using, this is sort of for your benefit. A lot of times I am just using the monitor on my screen, on my phone, because it helps me not get caught up in detail too much. It helps me see the shapes better. So it's, you know, I don't, with this type of painting, you know, I am really looking for more of the personality of the scene. I'm looking for those sort of abstract shapes and things. And sometimes seeing it too big actually is detrimental to my interpretation of it. Okay, so this is just a start of this. I will come in and do a couple more things down here later, but we can get into this middle ground, which is where all the fun begins. And when I get in here, this is going to make everything else somehow all of a sudden feel okay. And that's the, you know, this is the kind of painting where you're, you know, when you're painting outside and someone walks up and they're like, oh, that's not very good. You know,
tuned in late. There's a question. Question from Alexander Cummings, who says, what are you using for the grass? That's a fan brush, a traditional fan brush, right?
Yeah. And it's a it is a natural bristle, so it breaks up all weird. If you try this with a synthetic bristle, again, it's just gonna it's gonna be even. Too smooth. Yeah, it'll be too even. So this is just great because it's just a wacky random brush. And when I'm doing this now, I am getting a little bit thicker with the pigment. And this doesn't hold a lot of water. So I know that, when I come in to do stuff here, it's not going to be too runny. I save the runnier stuff for the initial washes. And then as I start to work through the painting, I'll get, successively a little bit thicker as I build on top of those layers. So I don't get that kind of, it really this is still all translucent. So we get a lot of color harmony here, but honestly, I haven't used much beyond burnt sienna, French ultramarine, a little cobalt blue, and a little bit of cobalt turquoise. So I'm not, I'm staying within a sort of color gamut and creating that kind of harmony in through here. Okay, so now comes the fun part. We're going to work on the corral and the barrel here. And these are basically detailed silhouettes, so they're backlit. I don't want them to be black and boring, so I will do some fun stuff with dripping some color in there. And I'm actually going to bring a little bit of lavender into this burnt sienna and a little bit of French ultramarine. And let's see here. Start with this and do a test. And I'm going to kind of block in this whole shape first.
That's what we call bravery.
Right. Having that confidence and that sort of bravado is developed. It's not, oh, he does that because he's that good. It's been a long process of getting the cojones and the confidence to know I can do those strokes.
Did you just say cojones on
cojones? Here? I did. Sorry, I didn't know if that was in the in the FCC rules or not. Okay, and now
Facebook is not regulated by Facebook is not regulated by the FCC.
Right. Well, I certainly don't mean to offend anyone. Okay. And while this is wet, I'm just going to drop in some of these cooler tones. I've put down a warm base, and then I'll sort of cool it off, and that's just going to give me a little bit of interesting stuff happening in there. Here's a little more blue. And I'm going to leave this wet at the bottom here because I'm going to connect I'm going to need to connect the shadow in while that's still wet. So I can see that there's plenty of liquid here because this shape it's not just the corral, it's the shadow shape that connects into it also. So before I do that, I'm going to grab some really thick pigment and do some of these fence posts and some of the stuff on top of the corral here. There's a little gate at this end. And this is just fun calligraphy stuff. And I'll put the idea that there's some in there. And there's this larger piece that comes through here. And yeah, I want it to look rustic. I don't want it to look too perfect. I want it to have some personality. But this dark now is pushing all of that background way further back. So, if I had done that background too dark, I know that this wouldn't have pushed it as much as it is now. So it's all kind of pre-thought out and pre-thinking. Let's put another little vertical there. Drop in just a little bit of dark here. And this is still wet here, so I've learned that timing. And again, when I'm out painting outside, I will try to be very careful about my position to the sun. So if I don't want the sun blasting on my painting, because it's going to make it dry too fast. And so I'll usually try to either paint in facing the sun or with my back. I can sort of work in a way that my body is blocking the sun if I'm painting something that's front lit. But you know, it's all about learning that timing. And Colorado is dry. There's no moisture here. So I've had to adapt to that and work a little quicker and learn how to get through paintings in a timely manner. So that's also started to inform the way I work through things, because I just simply don't have the time to think about it, right? So because it's going to be dry, and then I'm not going to be able to connect shapes and things. So again, that understanding of my process and the practice of my process to knowing that it's going to work when I get outside, it helps me work in the same way in the studio as I would when I am out there in the field.
So Karen was asking about your lavender, and do you mix your lavender in? I think we saw you use lavender into some of the brown earlier.
Yeah, so I had put some of that burnt sienna down, and then I basically just dripped water. It's basically just a wet on wet mix of just sort of letting that mix and mingle and do its own thing, and you're going to get a completely different kind of tone and interest than if I tried to mix that in the palette. So having those colors mixed by themselves on the paper is vital to create a kind of interesting tone that isn't just the same color that you'll see. Like, every person who wants to paint this, if you're using colors straight from the tube and you're not thinking about the tones that you're mixing or how you're even mixing them, then you're gonna run into these very I'm really always interested in making watercolors that don't feel like they're just what's the word? Adult coloring books is one phrase I like to use a lot. So I want them to feel like paintings. I want them to look like paintings. And I'm always mixing everything. So when people, a lot of people will ask, what color was that? And it's basically either a warm and a cool, or I'm mixing two neutrals together. I'm neutralizing color with its opposing color from the color wheel. So, there's a little bit of, and that's a wonderful thing to learn in the studios, is to experiment with color and play with how those things are going to work, knowing what colors complement each other and what colors are going to neutralize each other. Playing around with that in the studio and just sort of starting to really learn and understand that is a great place to do it. Okay, so all that's really left here is to connect these shapes with the shadows. And this is going to add some really fun calligraphy, some really interesting kind of unifying sort of stuff. The shadow of this guy connects into here. The shadow of this can kind of come over this way. So I'm considering about, this is backlit, so my light source is somewhere back over here. So I'm just bringing these shadows over this way a little bit. There's probably a little shadow from something back over there. And as I'm kind of playing around with this, Eric, I got to tell you, listening to that promo, it's just amazing the relationships I've made through the different events that you do. And, thank you for that always. It's amazing being able to say that most of the people in that promo are either friends or I've painted with or done events with. It's just wonderful. So, to anyone watching who's either considering going to the Plein Air Live or the Plein Air Convention, it's just an amazing experience. So I just wanted to, again, thank you for that opportunity to all of us to kind of get together and get to know each other. It's a wonderful thing.
Thank you, Dan. That's nice.
Yeah.
Plein Air Convention is coming up in May. I've not mentioned that. We don't know if they're going to allow us to have a full capacity. Right now, we're about half full. And if they say cut it to half, we're going to be very close. So get your tickets and get it done. Everybody. Okay, so I'm just putting in some additional little fancy stuff back here. Fancy stuff.
Very
light touch.
Yeah, this is, I don't have much pigment on the brush. It's right on the tip here, and I'm holding the brush way at the back. So I just get these nice kind of delicate marks. And again, that comes from studio practice and learning, getting in those brush miles and knowing if I press a little harder, I'm going to get a thicker line. If I press really thin with the same brush, I can get a kind of thin line. So I'll just kind of put something there. we'll have something popping out over here. And then I just might do a couple blades of like what I would call hero grass. They're just
Why do you call it hero grass?
Hero grass, because it's sort of like important grass. So I've kind of you know, like if I had a crowd of figures here, there would be one figure that I consider the hero figure, and he's the one that has to look the most like a figure, and then everything else can just sort of be humanoid. So I sort of apply that to grass. So this will be a grassy texture, but I might want like a nice bigger sprig kind of through here. Add a couple little darks. So they're more things that help you identify these shapes as grass, I guess. And this can just go on ad nauseum. You know, I don't want to get too much. And it's also hero because, you know, there isn't there can't be a ton of heroes. You only need a couple heroes to really just say, you know what, this is some long kind of Colorado grass cutting through some of this snow.
Very nice.
Okay, and that's basically it.
Why don't you come back on camera?
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm.
What did you start to say?
Oh, I was going to say, you know, so one of the funny things is, you know, I've got this little blob of pigment up here from
It's a bird.
It's a bird. Yeah, you got it. So I'm just gonna, and this is sort of in the foothills. So we're not going to have seagulls. We're not going to have a lot of things, but we will have a red-tailed hawk. So there's a little red-tailed hawk.
A bird with a blob.
Kind of a little bird with a blob. Okay, so let me switch my camera back here.
All right.
And well, that was a lot of fun. Thanks.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It's all you're always fun to have on. If you got in here late, meet Dan Marshall, everybody.
Hi.
Hey, Dan, I got to give you a plug, a shameless self-promotion. You have created a watercolor plein air box that you design and sell. And I don't know if you're doing that anymore or not. Are you?
Well, I'm really behind, and I apologize to everyone who's waiting. I have 6 that are very close to being shipped out, so please be patient. I'm actually not taking orders at the minute until I can figure out a way to be a little bit more responsible with my production, because they're built completely by hand. It's all, you know, there's no. Even the slides and the hinges and things are all handmade. So it's a quite extensive process.
Well, why don't you show it? Do you have one handy? Why don't you show it to us?
I do. Let me see.
And then we'll tell everybody they can go on a waiting list. And then, right. And then of course you won't be painting. You're going to be building boxes. This is
sort of the full size version here. And it basically has a tripod mount. So I can set up in seconds. This pops onto the tripod, and then the top flips up, and there's storage for your brushes and all kinds of things. But actually, if I can expand on that for 1 second, I am doing a oh shoot, I can't find it. But I started doing these smaller cigar sketch boxes. Yeah. That are also completely designed for watercolor, but I think those are on the website. Anyway, I really enjoy the woodworking aspect, but I'm behind, so I apologize.
Yeah, I get that. Well, we'll put the website up there, and people can check it out and maybe get on the waiting list in case you notify. But it looks like a good product. I've seen it in person, and it's very well made, very handcrafted. So congrats.
There'll be a few at the Plein Air Convention that people will be using. So if you go, you can check them out there. And if you want to come visit my studio, I'll be happy to show you mine also. So.
Yeah, terrific. Well, thank you, Dan. I appreciate you being on today. And
thank you so much.
See you at Plein Air Live next week, starting Wednesday is Beginner's Day, and then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, long days, ending the day with painting together. You're going to be on there communicating with people and teaching and so on. So thank you for doing that. And then we'll see you at the Plein Air Convention in May. You know, unless a nuke comes in and gets us right.
Well, let's hope not. Let's hope everyone just takes their toys and goes home.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you, Dan.